Welcome to Formula World. I'm your host Dylan Shelley, and here's what's on this episode. First up on Formula World, distinct danger of losing Williams and Racing Point. F1 teams have very limited sources of revenue from the sport during the current period of inactivity. This can be especially harsh for those teams that do not have the backing of a major factory. Two such teams happen to be Williams and Racing Point. Motorsport UK chairman David Richards spoke about how Formula 1 needs to take some steps to ensure that these teams don't go out of business. A lot will depend on the way Formula 1 behaves throughout this. F1 cannot afford to lose teams at the back of the grid because that would be a disaster for them. He cited former F1 Supremo Bernie Ecclestone's methods that were aimed at helping the smaller teams survive during the difficult times. Bernie made sure that when there were tough times, the smaller teams were looked after, and I hope that Liberty sees the common sense in that too. He concluded by warning that these smaller teams have few options in front of them and need the backing of the organisers to come out on the other side of this pandemic in fighting shape. But if you look at Williams and Racing Point, for example, it is not going to be easy for them. There is a distinct danger of operations going out of business. There will be motorsport companies who do not have the resources to get through this period. It is going to be a real challenge. The positive thing about the situation. One of the biggest issues for this year would have been the challenge faced by teams to develop this year's car as well as next year's car at the same time if the season had proceeded as scheduled. But the teams can breathe a lot easier now. AlphaTauri team principal Franz Tost elaborated on this by saying, "The positive thing about the situation that has now arisen with the coronavirus is that this year we don't have to develop two cars at the same time. In addition, it means that the development of the new car will take place within the introduced budget cap." He also shed some light on the parts that cannot be changed between 2020 and 2021. The chassis will be completely taken to 2021, just like the mechanical parts and the suspension. The aerodynamics are the only thing that can be improved. There is, however, the doubt in many people's minds as to how the FIA will enforce these bans on development. Tost explained how the FIA plans to keep the teams under check. The FIA checks the wind tunnel and makes videos and photos of it. This means that you can't just put a car in the wind tunnel because that difference would be immediately noticeable. In addition, the FIA can retrieve images from the wind tunnel and they can check the latest model tested. They can see the data, so you have to do everything you can to get that data to match. In addition, the chance of things going wrong is too great because too many people are involved in the wind tunnel. He also gave his thoughts on McLaren being excluded from the chassis development freeze. That's a matter between the FIA and McLaren. Of course they are allowed to modify part of the engine because the Renault engine is of course very different in design from that of the Mercedes. However, it is up to the FIA to check that. Ecclestone Criticises the FIA. Former F1 CEO Bernie Ecclestone has been more or less quite critical of the current management in F1, and he yet again had some harsh words for the FIA and the way in which they handled the investigation into the 2019 engines of Ferrari. The FIA should never have done what they've done now. That statement was wrong, and so was the agreement between Ferrari and the FIA. What is written in that agreement? Because it was within the rules, and if not, you have to punish them. He further elaborated on why he found the whole thing absurd. You now have an agreement, so the FIA says you are 100% guilty, but there is nothing we can do about it. It happened now, so we are not going to punish you for it. He concluded by pointing out the way he managed the infamous Spygate situation. There was a team once very angry with me that I suggested 100 million as a punishment. Did Helmut Marko get infected? One of the most common age groups under threat of the virus are the elderly. Red Bull advisor Helmut Marko belongs to that group and feels that he might have already contracted the virus. In the middle of February, I had a very bad cold, with a lot of coughing as a result. The situation lasted 10 days and that felt very long to me. With retrospective effect, I know for sure that I had the virus at that time. On the flight back from Australia, we stopped in Dubai and everyone was coughing. Well, then I really should have been infected. He used this as an opportunity to yet again criticise the steps currently being taken to combat the pandemic as an overreaction. If even older people like me can survive the virus, I think it's also important to panic less and deal with the situation much more rationally. All of this has to be taken with a grain of salt, as Marko didn't reveal whether or not he got tested for the virus. Fast feed. F1 commentator Martin Brundle is very sad not to witness the fight between Max Verstappen and Lewis Hamilton now. Former F1 team boss Flavio Briatore is of the opinion that Red Bull driver Max Verstappen is the perfect driver to see on the track, and that there is no doubt that he is better than his father Jos. Pirelli will work together with all parties involved to identify the best approach from now on regarding their contract running out in 2023 and how it will affect the regulation change that has now been postponed for 2022. And Renault driver Daniel Ricciardo is upbeat about the current situation as he can really make a training camp now, something he can't always do as he now doesn't have to rush. Will F1 lose any teams because of the events of this year? Be sure to vote in the poll and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you like this video, feel free to subscribe and check out my others for all the latest in the world of Formula 1.